Welcome, students, to Unit 1, Video Lesson 2. This is Mr. Zatola,
And Mr. Greavy.
and we are going to go over some of the slides from your notes packet.
So, guys, you should have finished off on your notes packet with levels of organization, and that was in your last in-person class. Remember, you do have a full copy of these on your Google Classroom if you want to refer back to them. We're going to walk through today some slides that will be then followed up with in person when you have your next class. So we're going to start with observations. An observation is a gathering of information by using our five senses. You guys are all familiar with these from other classes, I'm sure. Sight, that's our vision when we see things. Smell, pretty self-explanatory. Hearing, taste, and touch. So the five senses, even though a lot of times people hear the word observation, they think that basically is about vision. It's really taking in any information with one of your five senses. We're going to talk about two major categories of observations that is important to understand when you're looking at data.
So when we look at anything, we observe anything, we're going to look at it in two senses, qualitatively and quantitatively. And I'd like to point out that if you look at these words, we have quality, part of the word quality in here, and then part of the word quantity in here. And those are your clues for these. So let's start with qualitative observations. So these are observations that describe. Again, here's our connection, qualitative and quality, a descriptive. The examples we have here are the flower has white petals, or Mr. M has blue eyes. And those are qualitative observations. Quantitative refers to more of a numerical observation. Using our same two examples, now the flower has 7 petals, or Mr. M has 2 eyes. So again, quantitative is the amounts, always has a number associated, and qualitative has a good description associated.
So great examples, Mr. Z. And I just want to add in there that, guys, we could still then divide up qualitative observations if we had some data. How many people in the class have blue eyes? How many have green eyes? How many have brown eyes? So you could set those up in such a way that you can organize your data, just like you can with quantitative observations. We could say something like how many of the plants, flowers have 7 petals, how many of them have 5 petals, etc. Let's talk a little bit about inferences. Now, observation versus inference is a really important distinction to understand in science. An inference is an explanation for an observation that you have made. They are based on your past experiences and prior knowledge. Inferences are often changed when new observations are made. So let me give you an example. Yesterday, lovely day out, I went outside my backyard and I smelled something. My observation using my sense of smell was that there was some smell that I recognized from my past experience as the delicious smell of grilled meats. I looked across the way and I observed that there appeared to be some smoke coming from my neighbor's barbecue. My inference, based on these observations, was that my neighbor was cooking up some delicious steaks. So even though I couldn't directly see the steaks, my observation based on the smells and my prior experience with delicious grilled barbecue meats led me to this inference.
And you used a qualitative when you said delicious meats.
I did.
If only your neighbor was kind enough to know that quantitatively he needed to grill extra delicious meats
Exactly.
so that he could have shared, that would have been just exceptional. Very good. So we're going to just go down the steps of the scientific method today. We're planning to explore these steps in much more detail when we have our class discussion. But we use the scientific method to organize, to organize our experiments, to keep it simple. So first thing we do is we recognize a problem, kind of like Mr. Greavy's yesterday's quandary of What is that smell? Okay. Uh, the hypothesis he made. What would have been your hypothesis when you smelled that delicious smell?
So so a hypothesis we're going to talk about later is a statement that is testable. So when I formed up my hypothesis, it was that my neighbor is grilling some delicious steaks.
So to explore this further, he might have designed an experiment to see if that hypothesis, his prediction to what his problem was correct by, well, many different ways. He could have said, I'm going to go over and ask him. That would have been one of his possible designs. Another might have been, I can do some research on it to try and really find out what makes that wonderful, delicious smell. After he's designed and chosen the experiment he wants to do, he would have to test that hypothesis, possibly by going and asking his neighbor if those were delicious meats you were grilling on that barbecue, and is that the smoke I see and the smell I smell? Uh, Finally, once he's tested the hypothesis by maybe going to act, he would use observations. I see that you're grilling delicious meats, and I saw the smoke rising from that wonderful barbecue you have going, and recorded his data, possibly in his experimental notepad, even through observation, something where he could collect that data for some type of analysis. Now, data can be presented in many ways. We like to use graphs for the analysis. So I think your graph of yes, that's delicious meats, or no, that is another smell, would have been easily presented in a bar graph. Certainly. Once has the data from it, he must draw a conclusion. This is where you go back to your hypothesis and you decide whether the information and data you've gathered affirms or says my hypothesis was correct, or, and this is the interesting part of this method, if your hypothesis was incorrect, your experiment isn't wrong and it isn't over. You could go back and restate that hypothesis to figure out what was happening. So I'm curious, Mr. Greavy, did you go over to your neighbors and ask and find out if there were delicious meats? Was actually a barbecue going on?
Unfortunately, I had some other things I had to do, so I was unable to complete this experiment. However, I'm sure there will be another opportunity for me to do that and to draw some conclusions about it, and hopefully to get myself involved in the eating of the barbecue.
That would be very good. So something we really want you to recognize is over on the left-hand side, we have some highlighted letters. You should know the scientific method and the order these are presented. Again, recognizing the problem, forming the hypothesis, designing an experiment, testing this hypothesis, observation and recording data, analyzing that data, and drawing a conclusion. Is my hypothesis correct or incorrect? We could use the first letters of these little statements to help with a statement known as RFD toad. It should and could help you if you memorize it that way, although feel free to come up with your own mnemonic to help remember this.
Absolutely, and I'm hoping there might be a few students who had me in previous years that will remember RFD toad from back when we looked at the same type of thing. It's very helpful to memorize those steps.
So that is starting out with, we had observation. All right, we went from observation to different types of observation analysis, so quantitative, qualitative, and finally ending up with the scientific method. So that is our portion of the notes for today's remote lesson. Feel free to go back and review this as many times as you'd like, and ask questions when we're in class talking about experiments and experimental design the next time we see you. Okay.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you in class.
Thank you.